I'm going to talk a lot. I'm going to introduce you to my new practice and some of the ways we think landscape architecture is the best profession in the 21st century. No offense to the architects. You guys will get there eventually. And I'm just kidding. I have an architecture degree too, so I can make fun of you. And then show you two case studies, because I wanted to talk a little bit about waterfront design, which has really been the sort of centerpiece of my career, my 20 plus years of practice, and particularly because I'm here in town here to lecture here tonight, but also because we're doing a strategic plan for the White River, about 58 miles of the White River, Hamilton County and Indianapolis, Marion County. And so we're doing public meetings all the rest of this week on the riverfront. So I kind of wanted to both situate that work in the context of other work that I've done, but also I just think that waterfronts are some of the most important and dynamic environments for landscape architects and meaningful environments, and have been to me. So I wanted to share two projects, one riverine and one coastal. But to tell you a little bit about my background, Martha introduced me already as having been for many years, for 21 years at Sasaki Associates. I went there right after undergrad and wound up going to graduate school. I was an architecture undergrad, wound up going to Sasaki for 3 years, practicing in landscape architecture because I was a CAD drafter and they needed a CAD drafter, so I was doing that. And then I fell in with one of the great all-time living landscape architects, Stu Dawson, who really took me under his wing, encouraged me to go to get a master's at Harvard, which they helped me to do. And then I graduated, went back to Sasaki, and became the first woman principal in the landscape practice in that office. And practiced there for another 10 years as a partner, climbing to their executive committee, which was the highest level of leadership. Had an incredible time and did some really extraordinary work. With Stu's work on riverfronts, he did the original White River State Park, a lot of that work in downtown Indianapolis, among many others. He taught me a lot of the skills that enabled me to work on waterfront environments across the country. I fell in the late 2008 into flood recovery through an experience of a disaster in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This was my first small project as a partner at Sasaki. You see this bottom left-hand image. I was meeting in City Hall, that building that typically is out on an island, talking about this riverfront, and the city manager said, "It's so good you're here because it's raining and we're going to have a flood and you'll get to see the river in flood." And then 2 hours later they evacuated us out of City Hall, and overnight that night they evacuated us out of downtown. It was the 5th worst disaster in US history. And went on to do 4 years of recovery work in that town, kind of learning on the job, as you might say, about what resilience means in practice. Have done tons of public space, open space work, and a lot around activation and programming and 21st century ideas. Lots of community engagement. We talked about that a little bit at the desks today. And then with my partner, Bree, really started getting into the realm of cultural planning at Sasaki before we left. And we left. Bree and I were both partners there, and we did a Thelma and Louise, and we grabbed hands, and we drove right over the cliff of starting a new practice together. Really inspired by the changing nature of public work, and really wanting to create a practice that could thrive in doing purely public work, which we were more and more doing at Sasaki, and also to create a practice that felt to us like a practice created by women and for women to succeed in. And so agency was the name of our practice. Agency is a term often used in philosophy to talk about our own ability to affect our future, our ability to make our own choices and really create our own destiny, and that we are the products of the choices that we make and not just of our environment. And to us, that was a powerful and quasi-feminist way of describing the kind of practice we wanted to make. And so it's our mission statement that we believe, Bree is an urban planner, I'm a landscape architect, that working together we can remove barriers together, that we can promote a practice that's fueled by optimism, and that we can work with communities to enable them to make positive change in the same ways we're trying to as a business practice. This is my partner. I feel really strange always talking about the business without her, because she's like the yin to my yang. I'm the sail. I'm like all the energy and wind, and she's the ballast. She like holds us steady and prevents me from running into walls often. And she thinks large scale strategic planning, and I'm the kind of physical designer, and together we love practicing. And this is some more kind of about our business and how we think about these realms of public practice and how we want to do them differently with a real emphasis on diversity and inclusion. And we talked a little bit about this today at the desks, about diversity and how different people bring different ideas about what beauty is, what comfort is, what feels safe, and that until we have more practitioners that represent the broader country, the work will never quite resonate with everyone in the same way. Our logo is this constantly changing A, and it was meant to be this evocation of this idea that, you know, Bree thinks some of the A's are ugly, and I think some of the A's are ugly, and I have some favorite ones, and she has some favorite. I mean, I'm sure you're seeing some. We did get rid of a few of the really ugly ones that were just ugly, but it's to say this idea of diversity is not just about ethics, it's also about beauty and different ideas about beauty and meaning. We also really want to build a practice, we're a year and a month into it now, that is about collaboration at its core, both as a practice of interdisciplinary leaders ourselves with our team, but also with all kinds of partners around the country. So we, since creating agency, continually find ways to partner in new ways with people, with institutions, with nonprofits, with other emerging practices. We have let go of traditional ideas about hierarchy in favor of really getting diversity at the table and celebrating also the fun and joy in practice of having people who like working together. So on our website we have this page we call Collaboration. You might find yourselves some image from today. I don't know, maybe Richard, maybe? Our interview. On this, we kind of showcase the ways that we engage with people around the country. On our practice today, we're really lucky. We've been working since we started a year ago all over the country. We've done everything from a 2-acre competition with my boyfriend and my soulmate, David Rubin, Land Collective, who you guys will hear about shortly. He's not really my boyfriend, but he's kind of my soulmate. So I was just texting with him, and I told him my lecture is going to be better than his lecture, so. Okay, tough crowd. So he and I did this 2-acre park together all the way to the White River, which is this 58-mile long strategic plan. So we love working at these different scales, at the site scale and then at the really large scale and then everything in between. And so we love working between the physical environment, the built, designed environment, all the way to the real strategy about cities and how they're changing. I wanted to just show you a couple of the kind of major themes that serve as the umbrella themes to our practice and how we've seen that displayed in some work, just briefly as a high-level introduction to our practice before I get into the 2 case studies. And so resilience, I already mentioned, this notion of disaster and change in our country. This just happens to be Hurricane Maria, but it could be any other one of the many disasters that we have seen over the last years, and the kind of extraordinary amount of devastation. And this incredible role that landscape architecture can play both in addressing those challenges physically in terms of green infrastructure and more livable communities, but also this notion of sort of building capacity of cities to be resilient themselves. This is a lesson that Bree and I learned firsthand when we worked on the Rebuild by Design competition, which we led for Sasaki. The Rebuild by Design competition was looking at the post-Sandy Jersey, we looked at the post-Sandy Jersey shore. It was a competition of 10 firms from around the country looking at Sandy-affected landscapes and putting forward innovative proposals. We chose to look at the Jersey Shore, which we just thought was this infinitely interesting problem. To this day, I still think it's the most fascinating problem, one of the most fascinating problems of coastal climate change. What do you do with these small beachfront communities that are real kind of summer swell economic engines for their state that are going to be impacted by sea level rise, that already are being impacted by sea level rise, but aren't big enough communities to really protect themselves? How do you think about that landscape changing over time? And so this was a poster that we made that sort of highlighted those economic values of the shore, but also some of their risks. Visual communication super central to our practice and making things that are beautiful and accessible to the lay public. So our idea here was all about kind of transforming these traditional beach landscapes into places that became more rich, that you would take a landscape of the traditional boardwalk. The existing condition of this is like a really kind of dead traditional boardwalk and a dead manicured beach. And instead, thinking about these ways that social spaces and ecological spaces could become hybridized to create more resilient and we think more beautiful places over time. And we thought this was awesome, and we had all these ideas about green infrastructure and dune building, and the community was like, yeah, that's fine, but our biggest problem is that we're a racially divided community, that we have the white population that lives by the beach and the black population on the other side of the tracks. There's this historic issue of lack of integration. This was the last integrated beach in the US, and so there was still this like remnant hostility between the community, and that really surfaced for them through the experience of the hurricane. So a lot of the work actually went on to become this kind of knitting together of the community, and a parade that we staged as part of our work from the African American neighborhood on the other side of the tracks to the beach, where the whole community was invited to participate, where the whole community was welcome to the beach, and where along the route we talked about resilience and what it would mean for this community. So again, this is what I mean. It's about the physical infrastructure, but we learn more and more from communities. It's also about that social capacity. This parade was one of the best moments of my career, and Bree was there, I wasn't, but she was texting me the whole time, because what happened after this parade still kills me. The people that sort of facilitated this parade, they were our resiliency task force, went on to run for city council and won and became the city council and the mayor position and ran on a platform of resilience and have since done a whole lot of master planning for that community. We're not working there anymore, but they're doing the work that we started, and that's such a powerful idea. I talk a lot about humanism. I'm not really interested in landscape architecture that looks good in magazines. Although I like that. I do like it when it looks good in magazines, but it's more important to me that it work well for people and that they feel great in places and that they want to come back again and again and that it's a meaningful place. And so when I was asked to come and speak at the LAF Summit in Philadelphia some years ago, I think this was 2016 as well, I spoke about this idea of humanism and what does it mean to have a humanist practice, one that's based on collaboration, one that's about integration of issues of social equity and engagement and community engagement. This is a landscape that I think really epitomizes this notion of humanism in practice. This is the Lawn on D. It was a 6-month-long design problem from design to construction to opening, 6 months. For someone who works in public sector work, that's like insane. Usually my projects take 10 years. This was 6 months. We had $1.5 million for a 2.5-acre site. It was meant to be a kind of temporary landscape to showcase what was possible next to our convention center, which truly, if I showed you guys the bigger aerial, is like our convention center in Boston is like landed in a sea of asphalt in this sort of downtown neighborhood. And so the idea was, how do we draw people to this emerging, changing neighborhood and test what's possible? So the Lawn on D came out of that. Painted asphalt, lawn, changing art exhibitions, movable tables and chairs, lawn games, really simple things. And then the centerpiece, the Howler and Yoon architects created this piece called Swing Time, which is a light-up swing set that's adult-sized. It actually has many different sizes. Again, to the diversity, it enables all different kinds of people to use it. When this project opened, the client was like, oh, I hope people will come out to the seaport. There was a line around the block of people waiting to get on the swing set. It became the selfie capital of Boston. There was an article in Boston.com that was like, every woman between the age of 22 and 27 has her picture on Facebook of the Lawn on D swing set. So just to say, really this incredibly engaging art pieces, and then wintertime programming and summertime programming all around this idea of human engagement. So fire pits and hot chocolate trucks in the wintertime when we had our first really big cold snow. Really bringing people into this landscape. And what I love about Lawn on D, besides the fact that it's enclosed and they serve alcohol, so you can go there and like your kids can't get out and you can sit for a long time. Not that I haven't done that a lot. But also that it's this constantly changing, beautiful thing, and you can go and you can meet people that you just wouldn't otherwise meet in the city, and it's just really incredibly lovely. When I talk about diversity, I think before in my career, 10 years ago, I might have talked about diversity from an ethical point of view, that it's important for women and people of color to be at the helm of our profession in the same way that others have been for a very long time. But recently I've really been talking about diversity through the lens of excellence, that without diversity we will not have excellence. And these are just a few examples of the way art is fundamentally kind of changing the way we think about excellence in theater, in public space, in music, and how important it is for landscape architecture to catch up with these kinds of trends and to really understand that if we stay a white and predominantly white male profession, we're missing out on the opportunity to resonate with a broader audience and the opportunity to make better work. And I think that's a really important part of our mission. As a feminist, as someone who has for a long time really fought for women, the erasure of women out of the professions through attrition over time, the lack of women in leadership positions is agonizing for me. And so I've spent my career really advocating for women and trying to figure out how to remove those barriers that we see. And we see some small change, but it's not enough. So I have this really amazing opportunity. I was talking about this today with my friend Tanner. Yeah, Tanner J. Pruitt. He's at Tanner J. Pruitt on Twitter if you guys want to follow him. We're Agency LP in case you want to follow us on Twitter. We were selected as one of the 5 Miller Prize recipients this year in Columbus, Indiana. Do you guys know about the Miller Prize and what it is? It's like a temporary installation they do annually. So we were selected as this incredible new practice to do this installation, which will open in August. And we decided that we wanted to make our project about this issue, about the erasure of women out of history and out of architecture. And so our whole project is really about taking cues from our former site, which was a switching station where women operated the switching station phone lines at the AT&T facility. We thought that was beautiful, that there were women there that used to make these connections, and how could we as women make connections? So we're doing this whole engagement process with that community, asking them to tell us about women who have changed their lives. And then we're going to host a whole series of programs over the course of the summer and through the fall, really showcasing those themes that come out of this sort of like, what have women done? At the same time, we're planting a garden that it will be mobile and changeable so that we can reconfigure and do all kinds of programming. Again, we don't know what kind it will be because we're doing the feedback right now, but just some ways we could imagine our space becoming this place of programming. And the whole idea is that we're really just using the landscape as a platform to tell these stories, to share these stories about women, and to celebrate their presence, both through the potential naming of plants in honor of those women as part of a planting party, to performances that really celebrate things like music and poetry, really whatever comes out of the community. So this, mark your calendars, it's opening August 24th. And we'll be doing some programming over the summer if you care to come see a feminist landscape in action. And then lastly, just a nod to democracy. That very fundamental idea of our country has become also critical to landscape architects, even more so I think in the last few years as we've seen a real rise in civic action. I think that we all are very aware, probably too aware, of how divisive our national culture feels at this moment and how deep these political divides feel between rural and urban in particular. And the map of our country during the 2016 election really shows that, this rift between urbanism and ex-urbanism and what that means for culture. We've seen this incredible influx of civic activity, everything from the Black Lives Matter movement to, I remember Occupy, what was it called? Occupy Wall Street, to the women's marches, just these huge crush of people on public space, and how important public space is to our sense of democracy and freedom. This was so inspiring to me, as was the Women's March. That's myself and my daughter in the green Minecraft hoodie, and my mother and my sister at the Women's March. And so we were so moved by seeing that landscape in action that when I was offered the opportunity to give a TED Talk, I talked about the importance of public space in actually healing and offering a place of connection between people who might fundamentally disagree, but landscape is really our common ground. It's our shared platform for urban life. So just one example of how this actually played out at the same time in practice, I was working on this landscape at Syracuse University. It was a road that ran through campus, and they asked us to make it into a public promenade, more of an outdoor classroom for that community. As you can see, it was just sort of a dead, gray, cold road. And we made it into this kind of wide public promenade with these kind of sitting gardens all along the side for outdoor classes. Great story, beautifully opened, students love it. You know, it's safer now for them to move across campus. But while we were in the design process, the project was actually radically protested. There was a survey, was it called a petition, that went around campus that was like, shut this project down. Why are we spending money on this beautification project when we should be spending money on education? This is a waste of our money. Is this a school or a resort? This was like heartbreaking for me, you guys, because I was like, wait, no, it's not beautification. This is public space. This is democracy. This is where we all come together. Don't you guys see it? And it went ahead. The project went ahead. We had to do some more community engagement. We did some like outreach to specific groups. We toned down the spending. We tried to make it more modest. But it was part of the campus's capital improvement project. It had been there for years. The chancellor wanted it done. So we did it, and it opened. And then the first month it was open, there was a Black Lives Matter die-in from end to end of the promenade. And it was so validating, because this is what we do, right? We create the place that gives civic action. And so here's our work, I would argue, having an educational mission outside of the classroom. Okay, so that's just kind of the introduction to who I am. If you guys want to get up and leave now, I totally get it. Okay, that was really the radical part. Now it's just projects. I'm going to show you two projects that were both meaningful to me. One that's completed, that was 10 years of work, the Chicago Riverwalk, and then one that's ongoing that I've been working on for the past 18 months, really, and that's just at the beginning. I thought it would be an interesting comparison. One's Riverine, the Chicago Riverwalk. The other is Coastal, the Sarasota Bayfront. I thought they would make nice comparisons, and I thought it would be nice to show you something that's really kind of finished, beautiful magazine quality images, and something that's really in process where I could show you what it looks like to create a collaborative design process. So I'll start with my baby, the Riverwalk. How many of you guys have been there? Oh my gosh, really? Really? Oh my God, what do you think? That's awesome, right? Oh. So when we got this job, it was like, it's hard to explain. Okay, I was 32 years old. 32. Oh, 32. That was I was so young. I was cute. No, just kidding. I was 32, and we got hired to do this job. Carol Ross Barney, an Institute of Chicago Architecture, called Sasaki and said she wanted a partner to work on this project. She had done the previous work, which is phase 1. And she said, I'd love for you all to come on board, and we agreed, and we decided to do this collaborative design thing. And at the time, it was the last year, I didn't know at the time, but the last year of Mayor Daley's tenure. And so when we were designing this, I had no belief in my heart that this project was going to be realized. I just didn't. I was like, at 32, I'd been practicing for 10 years. I kind of knew most projects like this don't happen. You're really just creating something with the hopes of getting it funded. It wasn't funded. There was no hope for funding. It was a big project because it was building new land on the water. So all of that complexity, I was just like, this isn't happening, which I think is kind of why it's awesome, because it was just like, all right, so let's make something great happen in drawings. So Carol had done phase 1, invited us to do phase 2, which are the 6 blocks from State Street to Lake Street. Famously kind of made physical by Burnham's earlier work, the 1909 plan of Chicago, and this idea that the lower level is roadway circulation, that's service for the city, the upper level is city circulation, and that there's this kind of Burnham-esque city beautiful promenade and these Beaux-Arts bridge houses that create this kind of front to the river, a very different idea of river than what preceded him, where it was purely industrial. And so we were given a site that had some semblance of resemblance to this, but not entirely. As you can see in Burnham's plan, there were these bridge houses, but they had passages, so you could walk around, you could walk through. And the site that we got was not that. The site had the beautiful ornate bridge houses and had the lower level promenade, but it wasn't continuous. So you had these 1 block long, lower, kind of dank, dark spaces with no foot traffic. Doesn't it sound like a dream? And they were about 7 feet higher than the water level. So even when you got down, you were still kind of separated from the water. So they were failing as public space. And Wacker Drive had just had a reconstruction, so there was a little bit of interest in beautifying them. And importantly, connecting those 6 blocks together and threading a new path together along that edge. I flipped it now, so the bridge houses are here. We're on the south side of the river, which is the lower end. As you can see, we had a 25 and 20-foot build-out, very little space. But that build-out was actually on water, so we were going to extend the land and build new land out on the water. As you can see, it still is an active shipping channel, so we had lots of negotiation with the Coast Guard and the Army Corps, all of those entities, and a lot of grade change. We had between 22 feet at Upper Wacker, the city level, down to the dock elevation at 5, so 17 feet, is that right, of grade? And then another 7 feet down to the normal pool, which is around -2 of the river. So all this vertical change and this very narrow space to work with to thread this new path together. Here you can see a really important drawing that says a couple of things. First, that Wacker Drive's whole infrastructure, structural system, is under our dock wall, so we couldn't do much to dig into that. We did ultimately dig into it, but it was like, don't undermine the highway running through town. And then the build out, as you see, and importantly, this notion that the Chicago River actually has a fixed flood horizon. It acts almost more as a lake than a river, so it goes between -2 and elevation 4. That's the fluctuation it has annually. When it hits elevation 4, they actually drain it to the lake, because there's critical city infrastructure above 4, which is very unusual for someone working on river, that you had a fixed environment, like a fixed horizon. So we knew we had this flood horizon. And pretty early in the process, we realized that the big challenge here was that the city and the river were disconnected, that they were kept purposely vertically separated, and that it was our intent to bring them into closer proximity. One of the earliest ideas was a little hand sketch that I did on my coffee table that was this idea that I called the river typologies. I think we came up with river themes, we called it for a while. But the idea was, could every block of this new riverfront be slightly different in program and character? And could those different experiences really harken back to the way people interacted with the river, kind of create something that really celebrates river engagement? So we came up with all of these different forms, that the path itself wouldn't be that rectilinear 90-degree in and out, but that it would actually have some shape to it to enable different kinds of programmatic readings. So the marina, the cove, the swimming hole, the jetty, all of these meant to be kind of evocative of those landscapes. This was actually, so Mayor Daley decided not to run. That happened, and then we were like, okay, there goes our project. I knew that wasn't going to happen. Good for me for knowing and not getting my heart set on this river. And then Mayor Emanuel came on board, and he saw the drawings for the phases that we had done, and he used an expletive. He swears a lot. Do you guys know that about him? So he said, like, get this effing done, and that was it. And he has at that time, friends in high places, as they say, and was able to get this incredible $100 million loan. Well, yeah, right? $100 million loan to build the project. Okay, but every dime of that has to be paid back by the project over 30 years. So we had to make sure that we could make $100 million in this landscape in 30 years. Which, interestingly, we did an economic analysis, we can do between boat slips and boat docking and restaurants. But when you go there, you feel that. It's making money, and as it's supposed to do. So we got the go-ahead, and we designed the construction documents, and we opened phase 2 in 2015. We opened phase 3 softly in 2016, and then kind of our big opening in 2017. As you guys might not remember, this is what the first block looked like prior to our work, that dank, discontinuous space, and that's what it looks like today. So threading these spaces together with this lower level walk, getting people as close to the water as we could to enable that life of the city and the life of the river to interact, welcoming people to sit and enjoy, to have spaces, trying to use every square inch to make place and make human scaled spaces that felt comfortable for people. Here it is from above, so you see the first space in the series was meant to be the food and beverage space with the big dining terrace, and this idea of a kind of defining element of the room, this folded wooden bar bench that would run the entire length of this football field length room. I get criticized a lot when I show this project for not showing process, because I just love the photographs so much. But I wanted to show you this because this is one of the things about design process that I love the most and I feel proudest of. This is the first prototype we built of that bar bench, right? So, and this is how we were testing it. Like, that's Alexis Cantor, who's now the managing principal of Scape, who worked there this summer. Someone did. Yep, see there, she's my girl when she used to work for me. So she was the landscape architect. She's testing whether or not it feels comfortable to stand at the bar, while Dennis is testing whether or not it's comfortable to sit in the bar bench. Someone in office services made this like in 20 minutes with some plywood. And we realized pretty quickly that our first round was not comfortable. It was like too sharp on the knees. The bar was too shallow. And so we iterated and rebuilt and iterated until we got to something. Have you guys sat on the bench? It's like dreamy, right? It's like, it just feels good in the back. So that's because we prototyped it in real time. So there it is in action, that upper level shot looking down at the bar and how it folds down to the water. It's just really, it's stunning. That bench makes me so happy. The little indentation here that you see, there's a few of them. Those are to enable wheelchairs to sit side by side. We made sure also in our prototyping, again to the point of diversity, that a wheelchair could sit shoulder to shoulder with a colleague because of the depth of that space. So just really making sure ergonomically it worked and also is just lovely and pretty. The Cove is the second room. This is inspired by human-powered craft and the growing recreational life of the river. So this kayakers, the idea here was, can we make a beach-like urban space instead of sand? We have precast. We have these kind of beachy grasses, working with the great landscape architect Terry Ryan to really work out this space and the planting to make it feel low-slung and beach-like. And people really do use it. The first summer it was open, Urban Kayaks actually rented kayaks here, so it became a gateway to the Riverfront experience for the downtown, which was lovely. And then we worked with, I was talking earlier to someone, Malcolm, about the difference between landscape architects, and Carol Ross-Barney and I had a lovely partnership through the project of working through the design of this, and we did the conceptual design of all 6 blocks together, and then we each took separate spaces and designed and implemented those. So the first 2 I led, and the next 2 she led. Very different sense of space, right? I think where ours is kind of like small, human scale, little nooks and crannies, Carol's is this like football field long staircase. It's so bombastic and awesome, and people are blown away when they walk through it. It's called the River Theater, and it's just mobbed full of people when they dye the river green. And you know, it's interesting, to the point about diversity, I noticed the spaces that I worked on attract extroverts like me. And the spaces that Carol worked on, you really find people that come to the River Theater and they sit by themselves. They find their special spot next to a tree. You see that? You see how it's not like mobs of people all together. That's why we need different kinds of designers, because again, designers all bring a different perspective, and so you get different kinds of people using the space. So Carol's staircase is bombastic and huge and beautiful, has these trees growing through it with custom grates that enable soil volume below to make the trees healthy. This ADA, actually less than ADA, 5% ramp kind of slicing through the staircase, enabling that 22 feet of grade from upper to lower. She also designed the next space, which we called the water hole, the water plaza. And her idea was to really create a place where kids could touch the water by the water's edge. And so, and here is that in action. And then there's my favorite space, and this is one that I led, called the Jetty. And the idea here was really to be inspired by the fish habitat in the river. This whole idea that we could create a place where you could experience this whole cycle of like fish habitat, fish livelihood, and then fishing, all in one kind of cycle. So there's all of this stuff that's below the surface that no one can see that we designed for fish. And it was all inspired by Friends of the Chicago River had done this, what they called the Fish Hotel, a little floating wetland that was like, it was like 8 by 10, and it was like this sad little green thing floating out in the Chicago River. But they could prove that fish really went there, you know, to hook up, because there was nowhere else on the river. And so we were so inspired by this idea of the Fish Hotel, we said, let's make like the fish paradise, and we'll make these huge gardens. So we built these incredibly big stainless steel planters that hold a soil medium and kind of are all knitted into place, that are fashioned together to prevent them from migrating around the river. Here's those fish caissons, again, just showing you some process here being lowered into the river. These actually go around the columns that hold up the piers, and that enables fish to have places to hide. So it makes them more happy than a blank gray wall. And here again is that idea of prototyping. So we actually took over the deck at Sasaki and taped out the paving pattern on brown paper at full scale. And we built all of the elements, the seating edge to make sure, again, that was comfortable. We started exploring the handrail. We didn't need a handrail here. It was really low to the water, but I wanted one that would feel like a perch, like a little kind of, not a sitting and relaxing, but just sort of a fishing perch. And so we designed this handrail that I'm so proud of because the lower rail is actually at the height for someone in a wheelchair to fish, and the upper rail only happens occasionally at the end of piers for a standing-bodied, able-bodied person to be able to fish. So we worked out how that detail would come together in these really important moments. So here you see the room is continuously that wheelchair height fishing, but then occasionally we pop it up in the corners of the piers to enable the standing person to fish as well. So, and then there's the floating wetlands. When they first went in, they failed miserably. It was the worst thing in the whole world, because when you promise the world that there's going to be floating gardens and they get torn up by the waves, it's horrible, but we made a little baffle and it fixed it, and they were beautiful. They actually grew to the top of the rail. And here it is in action, kind of floating as they rise and fall against these pillars out in the water. So that's the end of the Chicago story. I was talking today to Mia. Where are you, Mia? Hi. About how we're often given problems that are like way bigger than we can solve in the boundary that we're given. Like, this is a really dirty river. I can't fix that. But what I can do is make an environment that everyone who passes through it has an experience of the river where suddenly they care about it a little more. And I think this is Carol Ross Barney's incredible metallic sheaths that protect pedestrians and the underpasses and bring light into these dark spaces. We had so many people write to us when this project opened to say like they had just never seen the river in this way. And I think that beyond any of the physical design is the real accomplishment of this project. Okay, switching gears, one more project. We'll talk about the Sarasota Bayfront, a coastal district. I told you guys this is like in process, so there's not a lot of finished work here. But it's a very different site, a coastal site on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, the west central side of Florida. Beautiful tropical vegetation, incredible sunsets over the water. The sky in Sarasota is just this really magic experience. And this site that we have is predominantly paved today. It's a big parking lot basically for a few cultural institutions, the Van Wezel Performing Arts Center, this purple icon, an old museum that's no longer functional, and the symphony, and then like a sea of parking right at the Bayfront. Our client is the Bayfront Conservancy, and they really wanted to, a nonprofit citizens group that emerged that really wanted to transform this site into a public park. So they hired Sasaki. This was like, they hired us the day I was giving notice, actually. And so I was like, okay, nice to meet you, Sarasota. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to work on your project. And they were like, not so fast. Stick around. So I'm actually working on this with Sasaki, which has been lovely. So the Sasaki design team and me have been working with an incredible team of implementation specialists and a technical team to see this project through master planning. When we started on the site, we walked through the history of this site. We talked about the birth of the site, how it was filled, how it used to be a marshland, how some of that, the shoreline, as you can see here, used to cut through the site. And so we have this kind of traditional urban fill, flat pancake of a site that we saw the opportunity to have more resiliency as storm surge and sea level rise start to impact this coast more. In the 30s, it became a place of recreation with these little gems of buildings, an auditorium called the Memorial Auditorium, and other kind of small civic buildings lining its edge. In the 60s, it became this kind of cultural space where these big 1960s Frank Lloyd Wright-esque cultural facilities came on board. That's when you see this kind of sea of parking take over the landscape. So good, yes, cultural life, bad, no, big parking lot. In the 2000s, a master plan was done to really look at revitalizing and making this whole part of Sarasota more walkable. And so our site really got the benefit of some of those suggested changes, continuous access along the waterfront and new transit. And then importantly, there's our site today, which has these existing cultural institutions, but also the sea of parking and all of these kind of connectivity challenges. And so those drawings I was just showing you, those were boards that we had at the first public open house where we asked people to walk through history with us to see the development of the site. I was telling the team today, one of the teams today, these public meetings are really about a two-way education. You learn and listen, and you teach, and so it's this constant process of, here's what we can show you about this site. Now you tell us about what you know about it and your experience of it. So we did this almost year-long master plan, went through multiple phases, tons of community input, was super important to the process. In fact, we had over 45,000 individual touch points in a community that's about 60,000 people. So just huge amounts of engagement in every which way. It was a huge part of the work to be out and active on social media. And we did it in every possible forum and format, online, in person, big public meetings, street teams, every which way you could possibly imagine we did it. We did a couple of really new and innovative things. You guys are going to think these are funny, but in a town like Sarasota, this was really new and innovative, and it was for me, actually as a practitioner. We did their first ever Facebook Live town hall, where we had 7,000 people watch a conversation between the mayor and myself and the project manager for the Bay. We went out and we did these really specific targeted outreach efforts with young boys and girls club to really get a more diverse and future-oriented, forward-looking part of the community engaged in the conversation about the Bay. And then we went out and we went to every farmer's market. We went to the young professionals beer night. We did walking tours. We did bike tours. Everything we could do to get the community engaged. So this is what I was wanting to show you the most, I think, about this project, which is just how do you take this ginormous team and this ginormous community outreach effort and turn that into design, right? 45,000 points of contact, and then there's like me and a pen and a piece of trace. So I was really proud on this project that we did these really amazing brainstorming sessions with this big team. After every public meeting, we would get together and we would have sort of a creative brainstorming brain dump. And so I would do these exercises that I would call green hats, where that meant everybody's wearing their most creative, most provocative, most big idea hat. You can't shoot down anybody else's idea. Just off the top of your head from what you just heard, what do you think the biggest ideas for the site are? And we would come up with these ideas and we would just sort of list them all out. We would get them going. And then we would sort of star them, the ones that were exciting or the ones that seemed like they had potential on the site. And then we would start clustering them into buckets of ideas. Like someone had an idea to create this big landform on the site. So we made a whole scheme about landform and thought about what that could do. Someone had an idea about an ecological village that capitalized on climate, so we looked at what that could do. And then we did one that was about connections outward. And then those became kind of the words that inspired us to think through physical design strategies. So then we would do these sketching charrettes, all of us, where different teams would take those ideas and draw on them, and then come back together again and share, and we'd start pulling out ideas to create single ideas. And then that led to this, and these are the three ideas. So one that was about this big landform, we called it Shift the Horizon. One that was about this ecological village where we would cut this new waterway through the site and make this kayak trail. And then one that was called Bridge the Divide, that was about actually the new cultural facility, because the cultural facility is going to potentially go into a new home, actually bridging the water and becoming a kind of iconic beacon where the park becomes this kind of green landform with parking below. And again, just more process drawings to show you. What was the class that I met with first today with the two concept options? Were you guys here? Yeah, hi guys. So remember I was saying big brush strokes? So I was thinking about drawings like this, it's two ideas. It's like an eco village and an island. That was that scheme, right? Or this one, it's kind of like a flooding edge, and so this is how we started the design process to think about how to do this, and then how to diagram on top of that systems of circulation, of parking, of ecological systems. And ultimately, the community kind of hybridized some of those ideas into our final master plan, which really was the Bridge the Divide scheme with this notion of a kind of cultural facility at the heart of the project with this big kind of pier landscape we call the wishbone that reaches out to the bay, that actually is tilted so you can get on the lower level and climb all the way up to the top here and be perched out over the bay, that connects you to these multi-levels, a continuous walkway, eco-restoration of the mangroves, and a new dining district here to the north. But you see the kind of transition of a place that was gray to a place that's green in its character and identity. So looking back, you see that wishbone that goes, touches the water on one side, climbs up the landform, and then becomes this big overlook to the waterfront. This dining district here that capitalizes on the water, the new cultural facility, the old cultural facility reused, rehabbed, and a small public park space here to the south. But we really wanted to show the community. They had come up with a series of principles that were foundational to our work, and so we then played back for them how there were parts of their principles in all of these design strategies. From the green and blue oasis of the mangrove was one of the ideas that they had, to all this new series of connections along the waterfront, over the waterfront, back to the city, to a place that really had vibrancy and life, that really welcomed all of Sarasota, that knit together these cultural institutions with landscape spaces that were comfortable and beautiful and green, and that offered an economic future for this site that could generate the revenue to support itself. So this dining district and the new cultural facility being this new hub on the waterfront and a new destination for the community, with maybe some floating wetlands, because they're cool. You know, you can do them more than once, I think, right? But what I'm proudest of on this project, I'll say the two things, and these two innovations I think truly came out of public engagement, and that's what makes me really proud of them. One was, when we started the project, there was all this discussion about where the new cultural arts facility would be. And so we did all of this thinking about this new cultural arts facility. But as we got out into the community and we talked to people, we realized there was all of this small-scale cultural arts and programming that was happening in the neighborhoods that had no place to be in a civic way. They didn't have their own theaters. They were always kind of using other spaces. And so we said, if you took all of those different burgeoning arts groups and gave them one home on this site, kind of a cultural incubator, then you would start to see, again, more diversity of programming and new kinds of arts and culture on this site. So that led us to actually partnered with that new Performing Arts Center, capitalizing on all of its public space improvements and parking and all of that good circulation, sharing an event lawn with this new Performing Arts satellite building, which would be a purely community-driven programming addition. So kind of a satellite that could start to incubate new forms of arts and culture in this landscape, which was a really exciting new idea for the community. And then the second piece was really so much concern through the process that we were going to make a space that only the wealthiest of Sarasota could participate in, that wouldn't speak to everybody. And so we committed, and the client committed, to a first phase that's a purely public park that's going to offer all kinds of new program, quasi like Lawn on D, something that's got a lot of experiment built into it, a lot of time for the community to come and own it, a lot of different ideas to attract all kinds of people from Sarasota, and hopefully invite more people to this site. And so this is the first phase. I'm going there to kick this off next week. We're going to be in construction like Lawn on D. It's like going to be a year-long project to open a first phase, which is really exciting. But it's just a really simple landscape of outdoor rooms that are shaded, that have infrastructure to enable this kind of testing of public program and thinking about all of the different ways a platform like that can become a place of public life in this space, from markets to movies to trapeze. The Ringling Circus got its start in Sarasota. So how can we bring some of that arts and culture here and welcome new uses? So those were my two stories. I'm just going to end with 5 slides on the White River, because you guys know about the White River. Runs through town, we found out today, although that studio wasn't engaging with it, right guys? But tomorrow, what are you going to do? Engage it. Engage the White River. So agencies leading this plan. My little practice is leading the White River Vision Plan. An extraordinary effort right down the road. I'm here in town. I'm pitching it to you guys right now. These are my last slides. You can be rest assured we're almost done. This has been a year-long process that we started in April. It'll conclude in April, to imagine new potentials for the White River through these 2 counties, 58 miles, huge amounts of terrain, very diverse, from the real rural reaches in the north at Hamilton County and Noblesville to the downtown Indianapolis to all of the quarry landscapes and industrial landscapes in between. So we have devised a series, what we call the reaches, these kind of 6 zones that are kind of shared character areas of the river that begin to give us a framework for understanding an incredible amount of space and an incredible amount of diversity. That's Bree, my other half. This is Eamon, the other landscape architect at Agency Today. This was an exercise we did with the community where we asked people to come and write a memory about the river, an observation about a challenge or an opportunity, and stake their flag in the river. We got thousands of responses. Just want you guys to read this one. Can you read it? Should I read it out loud? Right? Right? Oh. So, landscapes and culture and meaning. We had so many profound comments and observations about this river that you guys runs right through this landscape, this region, and people aren't engaging with it, and it's such a huge opportunity. So please, in your projects, please engage it. We've picked 10 sites to start showcasing ways of engaging, so ideas for engaging that start to celebrate the diversity of the river. Again, from Strawtown-Katiwi in the north, great outdoor existing park, to Southwestway Park in the south, and lots of spaces in between. These are the kinds of drawings we're making to talk about. This is Strawtown-Katiwi, just north of Noblesville. So here we're talking about there's already a wonderful park that exists there, but it's not engaging with the river. Sound familiar, studio? So how do we start to actually invite people to the river from this place? How do we connect them so that when they're driving by, they don't just think it's no man's land? When they're driving, they see that there's a trail that takes you down to the river that connects. There's some idea about bison grazing. I kind of forget what that is, but it's something to do with people coming to see the bisons grazing. This is Keystone, which is a landscape that sits at the center of our study area. It's a crossroads of the highway and the river, where a lot of kind of corporate campuses and some sort of retail development has happened. Here we're imagining a landscape of fitness and connectivity where people can get out into the landscape at lunchtime, get off their computers and go for a run, go kayaking, go connect with the river. So again, inviting people down to it, providing continuous access, ecological restoration to sort of partner with public space improvements and public programming. These are drawings by David Rubin Land Collective, who are on our team for this work. And then in downtown Indianapolis, we've been really excited to talk about this big idea about the free-flowing White River, that we're going to do what we can in this plan to recommend that the dams be retrofitted for continuous recreational access. I got a little like woo-hoo on the front. And so this is the Emmericksville Dam reimagined as a sort of terraced landscape that enables white kayak motion down the river, that creates observation places and places to engage with the river, that starts to connect to the public park spaces that line the river. So a huge opportunity to think about a river that's continuous for fish and for people and for hydrology. And then lastly, Southwest, I'm just showing you a few of the examples. Southwestway Park, a great park that like nobody knows about. Oh, you know it? I'm getting all these thumbs up. I hit a nerve here. So this idea that these landscapes can become places for education, that we could have Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts come and camp out here and engage with the river and get out on the river and engage with nature, and that we can make this actually kind of a gem in the Indianapolis park system. So my last 2 slides, and I'm out of my voice, so that's good. 29th, 30th, 31st, tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, we have public meetings. You can go to mywhiteriver.com to learn more. But we'll be showcasing all of these strategies and more. We'll have boards like this that really say, okay, so here's what we imagine for Riverside and the dam and downtown, strategies, ideas, asking people for feedback on it. So please come on out. It would be lovely to see you. It would be lovely to show you the public engagement in action. And thank you.
Thank you. I know some of you have to leave, but we have a few minutes for questions if anybody has any. Oh, go ahead.
When did you say the Columbus project is supposed to start?
Oh, so the Columbus project is technically the exhibit Exhibit Columbus opens August 24th, but because we're planting a landscape, we're going to start in May. So keep your eyes on the website. On our website, too, we'll be broadcasting about when our events will happen. So we'll be going probably June, July, August. Yeah, come on out. Hi, Jonathan, you have a question? Are you going to ask me about advocacy? Okay.
So activism, advocacy, academics don't exactly fit neatly into business practice of landscape architecture. You talk about doing buildings on the way down. Is that a constant push-pull for you, or is it something that manifests itself just through projects, or how do you incorporate that in practice?
Well, great question. I knew it was coming. I was prepared. You know, I think advocacy takes many forms. For agency, we see advocacy as built into every project we do. So like the White River, for instance, is a form of advocacy to talk about the free-flowing river, right? That it needs to be free-flowing for the fish and for the people. But more and more I find, and I think you might say this too, like advocacy happens often on my own time. It's my own passion for these issues, and so whenever there's an experimental opportunity like the Columbus work, or there's someone asks me to write something for a magazine, or a TED Talk comes up, or you know, frankly, I just see that there's a topic that needs to be talked about. Like I wrote this piece about protest that was in Arc Daily, and that was really just me going, oh my God, like we just had 5 million people march in the US, and no one's talking about the fact that landscape architects created that ground, right? That we designed for that kind of use. And so I just wrote it. You know, I just did the research, and I did some surveying, and I wrote it. So for me, I think I'd love to see it, and I think part of why we created agency and named it agency is because we want to find more ways of making it more meaningfully integrated with our work. And I think it's interesting, like we've been putting that out in the world, and we've been getting it back, which has been nice. Like at Sasaki, and I love Sasaki, I would never say a disparaging word about it, it's like in my blood. But it is a traditional kind of practice, and those projects always felt like small side projects that I was always sort of like, come on guys, just let me do this one little weird thing, you know. At agency now, I broadcast, we're interested in it, and we're getting a lot of like interest in that, you know. Like I think it's why us as a 6-month-old practice won a Miller Prize, because we came out really strong with like, we want to do something different with this practice. And then the only other thing I would say is that advocacy, when you think about the work through the lens of advocacy, it can really be, and this is what we try to do at agency, every decision, right? Every teaming opportunity, every time someone reaches out for help. We've helped other people start their businesses now because we kind of have enough, we've done it once, we know how to download the software and start the invoicing procedure. So now we're helping other women and other people of color. We like advertise that we're happy to help you figure this out. We team in interesting ways. Bree is teaching at Harvard this semester, so we're just looking for all of those opportunities to just advocate for what we believe in. So. Hi.
Hi. So this is my first year program, and we're kind of being introduced to architecture, urban planning, and landscape architecture. So with your schooling, you said that you have like an undergraduate architecture. How did you like change into landscape, and how does that work, like with the educational systems versus like certifications?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. I think it's, Martha, I'd love to hear you answer that too. I think it's, my husband was the dean of a school in Mexico for a little while that was bringing together a bunch of design programs, and he did this big survey of schools and went and talked to people about this idea that it's really hard when you're 18, 19. When I went to school, I didn't know what landscape architecture was. I knew architecture. I knew it was like designing buildings. I had no idea about what landscape was. I don't know if I had known at 18 or 19 what landscape architecture was, if I would have done it. But I think it's great that you're in a place where you're getting to see it, and you're getting to see it in comparison to what architecture offers, and you're potentially getting to do both of it. You're getting to try it. I think that I wouldn't advocate for you to change, although landscape's great. I don't know if I mentioned it, but it's the most important profession of the 21st century. So, yeah, that's okay. We can share. Yeah. I know, because I am one. But I do think whatever you can do, and I was saying this today to one of the teams I met with, whatever you can do out of school to practice in a place that has multiple disciplines, I would highly recommend it. I wouldn't have known about landscape architecture had I not gone to Sasaki. I wouldn't have known how to talk to engineers had I not gone to Sasaki, or how to really work with graphic designers to tell powerful stories. All of that came out of it, and I think as a foundational practice, a lot of times people want to go work for like a practice that's really excellent in this one particular place, and maybe there's a place for that. I would just strongly recommend finding a place that at least has a couple of disciplines so that you get a little more fluency of across like language skills across disciplines. And so it's good you're in a place here that offers you that already, and that you're questioning that, right? And I would say too, like, I know so many architects they're kind of landscape architects, and I know a lot of landscape architects that are kind of architects. There's a little blurring that's happening in the professions, and so and that's a slippery slope about expertise and professional degrees and all that good stuff. But I do think there's like a lot of room in design to find a path that's not one or the other. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay,
Thank you. That was a lot of talking.